Okay, while our panelists are seating themselves, is this on? Can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay, good. It is my pleasure to be here tonight to moderate this panel. And as I go around the state, up and down, people are always asking, because I'm from San Francisco, what is going on with this constitutional convention? And to tell you the truth, I hear bits and pieces, probably like all of you. And so when I was offered the opportunity to moderate this panel and to hear firsthand from the different groups that are proposing different initiatives, I obviously wanted to do it. So I'm looking forward to learning about the different proposals that are out there and the different groups. And I thank you for caring about California and making reforms. And being in the state assembly has been very, very frustrating. It is difficult to govern these days. Given our tough fiscal times, our 2/3 requirement to pass a budget and taxes, it's not easy. And so I appreciate any group that wants to help us make reforms at the state level. So today, I am here, Fiona. I'm representing Assembly District 12, which includes the west side of San Francisco, Daly City, Broadmoor, and Colma. California was admitted to the Union as the 31st state after ratifying its first constitution in 1850. But we quickly outgrew our first attempt as the state flourished, and a constitutional convention was convened in 1878 to address calls for reform. The ensuing constitution was ratified in 1879 and is still the law of the land, making it one of the oldest state constitutions in use today. Its long life, coupled with numerous partial reform efforts, have resulted in what is now the world's third longest constitution. With 512 amendments, the Constitution of California is 8 times the length of the U.S. Constitution. One of the many contentious issues in our Constitution is the requirement that we pass a state budget with a 2/3 majority. As a majority whip, one of my main responsibilities is ensuring that bills that make it to the floor of the Assembly have the needed votes to pass. Accordingly, I'm keenly aware of the difficulties that are presented by requiring a supermajority vote on difficult issues such as taxes and budgets. In fact, the California legislature has been unable to pass a budget by the end of the fiscal year in 22 of the last 30 years, a problem which ends up costing the state millions. But the problems in California run much deeper than difficulties faced with a budget. In a state that touts an economy larger than all but 10 countries, it is unacceptable that our per-pupil spending in public schools has dropped to 47th in the nation, that we have 2 of the most congested regions in the country, and that our unemployment rate is higher than the national average. What's worse, California is consistently ranked the worst state in which to do business. In light of these very serious problems, a movement has been growing which would rewrite the California Constitution. There is some disagreement, however, as to what the best way is to achieve the reforms that are necessary to get California back on track. Some, such as Matt Regan from the Bay Area Council and Repair California, or Robert Cruikshank from the Courage Campaign, are calling for a California Constitutional Convention where delegates will convene to determine these reforms. Others, such as Dennis Quillen with California Forward, proposes making these reforms through the initiative process. And also joining us today is Blair Bobier with the New America Foundation, which has acted in an advisory role but does not have an initiative on their own which they are advancing. These respective organizations were invited to participate today by the San Francisco Young Democrats because of their varying approaches and insights in this very important issue. I'm happy to participate because I believe in the importance of engaging the public early in this process and to ensure everyone is educated about the various vehicles so that we can all be part of determining the best road to reform. So thank you all very much for being here. So I think to start off with, we're going to just do a quick introduction, and perhaps you can give your name, your organization, and a little bit about what your proposal is.
Great.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, so my name is Dennis Quirin, and I work for California Forward. So California Forward is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're funded by 5 major foundations in California who a few years ago realized that if you care about public education and public safety and good roads and everything that government does, you're only going to get so far until you fix our government system. So they designed a strategic plan process that led to California Forward, the organization. So in 2008, we officially formed. Last year, we played a lead role with Prop 11, which was the initiative that passed redistricting. And right now, we're in the middle of sort of the final stages of drafting a couple of ballot initiatives. And so there's basically 2 initiatives that we're looking at. There's a number of different items underneath each of those. One of them is constructing a budget process that applies lessons learned and works with best practices. And there's about 5 components to that. One is a pay-as-you-go proposal. The second is basing budgets on results. A third is using one-time revenues wisely. And a fourth is 2-year budgeting. And then the 5th component of this is lowering the vote threshold from 2/3 to simple majority for passing a budget. So that's obviously different than budget and taxes, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. And the second proposal that we're looking at running in a couple of weeks would propose to bring government closer to the people. So there's a couple of main components to that. One is protecting local revenues. So a lot of you have heard how in the sort of the budget kind of process, one component was borrowing money from local governments. So we would say money that is levied locally would be protected from being borrowed. And then a second component of that, of the Government Closer to the People initiative, is to create a community charter. So that would allow for any county, city, or school district, or any combination of sort of multiples of those that have overlapping jurisdictions, to come together, identify some specific problems in there, in those jurisdictions, develop a community plan, and then have the possibility to, with a simple majority vote, raise up to 1 cent in sales tax to help fund that plan. So the idea there is to foster local collaboration amongst local jurisdictions, so cities and counties and school boards, and to provide some more money as an incentive for folks to work together to pay for some local services. This isn't mandatory. It's something that should configurations of those districts want to get together to sort of figure this out, they could. So that's a key distinction there. And so the last thing I'll say about the plan that we're proposing, and we'll get into strategies for fixing the state in a second, the way that we see it, and I think a lot of you would agree, we've been in a big budget crisis now for a number of years, but it's been highlighted in the public's eye for about the last 18 months or 2 years. And what this has done has created and sort of helped further this thinking that the general public has that state government isn't working. So there's no trust. There's no trust in government. And this is something that has always been bad, and it's gotten a lot worse. And our premise of all of this stuff is, until you can stop the hemorrhaging, right, stop this, just the crisis that's happening, we'll never be able to have the conversation about other things that are critically important. And that includes the real conversation around taxes, around spending priorities, and a lot of things. So, there has to be a level of trust in government that doesn't exist currently in order to have some of these bigger conversations. We believe that our proposals would take advantage of this window right now. It's sort of the silver lining of the crisis, right? People want change, and they want change now. And we've been working on this for 2 years. We're going to take it to the ballot, and hopefully in November 2010 we'll see some results. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Robert Cruikshank. I'm the Public Policy Director at the Courage Campaign, which is a online progressive organization, a multi-issue organization dealing with a lot of different projects, problems, and needs here in California. We have well over 700,000 members organizing for progressive change. I come from Monterey, which is where the first California Constitution that the Assemblywoman mentioned earlier It was perhaps not a perfect document, but in some ways it was actually quite progressive for its time. It guaranteed, for example, language rights for the Spanish-speaking population in California, which had just lost their lands to the American conquest. That got taken away in the 1879 Constitutional Convention. But what the Monterey Convention showed us is what happens when you bring a group of people who actually represent the broad diversity and rich diversity of California together. They can produce a document that can be fairly workable. The Courage Campaign, like so many of the other organizations represented not just up here, but so many of you out there in the audience, have come to realize that California is broken. Our state government is failing us. Not because we have bad legislators, they're very good legislators, but they are sent to Sacramento to work in a very bad system that makes it almost impossible for them to address the very serious problems our state faces. And so as we looked at how we achieve some of our big progressive goals like universal health care in California, how do we fix the initiative process, how do we deal with the education problems that we face in our state, how do we create jobs for people who desperately need them, we ran into the same things that everyone else up here has ran into, which is the fact that the state government is broken. And at the Courage Campaign, we looked at a number of different things that needed to be fixed. We need to get rid of the two-thirds rule for both budget and taxes. I would disagree with my colleague to my left that you could do just the budget alone. I think that would not necessarily solve the problem that we have. We, as a state, don't raise enough money to pay for our core services, and we haven't done so for about 30 years. We looked at the initiative process, if you can call it that, which has been captured by a very small group of special interests who have the money to keep putting flawed initiatives on the ballot year after year, whether it's parental notification, whether it's Proposition 8. These are examples of a system that's completely broken in how we give the people of this state the power to influence policy. We looked at the budget process that needs fixing. We looked at a number of other things, and we support numerous ways to do these, right? There are initiatives out there that we are collaborating on to deal with the two-thirds rule. There are initiatives out there that we are collaborating on to deal with term limits. But there's so much that needs to be done and so many resources that are necessary to get there. It costs at least $2 to $3 million just to get an initiative on the ballot. Then you have to run the campaign to get it approved by the voters. That's not money that the Courage Campaign has. It's not money that our 700,000 members have. They're being hit as hard by the recession as most of you. And so we started to look for ways that we could achieve a number of reforms at the same time. And that's where the Constitutional Convention really stood out to us as a big, bold idea that could work for California. Instead of having to run 5 or 6 or 7 different initiative campaigns, you could run 1 or even 2 and put a convention on the ballot that could bring the people of California, and by the people of California, I mean the people, right? A rich cross-section of our state, not rich in terms of wealth, but rich in terms of background, into a room resembling this or something larger, to hash out the problems that face California's government, to be big, to be bold, to look at everything about how our state operates, how it is governed, and figure out how we can improve it and fix it. I think it's important to keep in mind that California has not just had 2 constitutional conventions, right? We had the 1849 convention in Monterey. We had the 1879 convention, which was held in the Capitol building in Sacramento. We've had a series of major constitutional changes almost every 30 to 40 years, the most recent of which was in 1978. Proposition 13 and the various changes it induced in the way the state does business fundamentally changed the way our Constitution works. And our Constitution in California is undergoing and will continue to undergo fundamental change. The question is, who will drive that change? Who will be able to propose those ideas to the people of California? That's one reason we believe that a constitutional convention that brings everyone, or at least representatives of everyone in this state, together is the best, fairest way to set that reform agenda. We think a constitutional convention has to be done the right way. We have a broken system. We don't want a constitutional convention that also has a broken system to it that can't address our problems. We have a stacked deck in Sacramento that prevents progressive change from happening. We don't want a constitutional convention to produce a stacked deck either. But we believe that a constitutional convention done right can accomplish a lot of the goals that we all share for not just fixing the way California is governed, but then getting those trees off the track and allowing us to proceed down to the bigger progressive goals that we all have and that we all share. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure we'll go through who these delegates are proposed to be later. Matt Regan?
Thanks, Fiona. My name's Matt Regan. I'm Director of Government Relations for the Bay Area Council. We're a business-sponsored public policy and advocacy organization. We represent the major employers in the 9 Bay Area counties, and we're not a chamber of commerce. We don't work on taxation and business regulation issues. We bring a business voice to the larger policy issues of the day: education, healthcare reform, water, energy, climate change, those sorts of things. And I run our government relations program, and a little over, about 18 months ago, I took a delegation of our members to Sacramento to talk about education, healthcare reform, water, all of the major issues of the day. And we went in August because the budget's supposed to be done in May, and we expected to have a fruitful, in-depth policy discussion about the major issues that California faces. We booked a room in the Capitol, and we brought the leadership in to come talk to us. And one after the other, they came in and they blamed the last speaker who just exited the room for the budget crisis, because the budget, of course, had not been signed. And it was a particularly embarrassing day for myself, being the person in charge of promoting and promulgating our policies in Sacramento, and bringing all of these sort of CEOs to Sacramento to listen to the leadership of both sides yell at each other. And so as we left the building, we thought, we need to do something. This cannot keep going on. I could list the crisis situations that this state currently faces, one after the other, from our prison population. The prisons are overflowing. Our schools are underfunded. We're now 47th in the nation after being first just 30 years ago. We're a knowledge-based economy, and if we think we can survive being 47th in the nation in public education, we're delusional. We have a water system that the legislature and the governor are still fighting over, that's on the brink of collapse. A moderate-sized earthquake in the Delta region would render 50% of California uninhabitable. And it's been that way for 30 years, and we haven't been able to reach a solution. And I could go on. And there doesn't appear to be the capability in the building in Sacramento to reach consensus and to get us the types of reforms that we need to function as a state. So we looked at what the problem was and what the problem could be, and we thought, it's not the folks that we're sending to Sacramento. We're sending good people up there to be our representatives. It must be the system. And we looked at what unifying factor within the system is leading to this dysfunction. And as Assemblywoman Mara mentioned, it's our Constitution. After India and Alabama, it's the third longest in the world. And Alabama is currently having a constitutional convention as we speak. So pretty soon it'll be India, then us. We call it the Winchester Mystery House of Constitutions. There are conflicting measures in there that boggle the mind. Constitutional scholars hold it up across the world as an example of what a constitution should not be. And as we are the 10th largest economy in the world, we cannot function and expect to prosper and continue to grow having this huge weight around our necks. So we decided that, we looked into the idea first of how do we fix this? And there are 3 potential avenues to fix our Constitution. First is the physician heal thyself method, an inside the building fix, bipartisan, 2/3 vote to have a Constitution Revision Commission, and have the results of that commission go to the voters. I don't think anybody in the room thinks that's a realistic proposition given the partisan divide in Sacramento right now. The second is through the initiative process that California Forward are working on, and the third is through a constitutional convention. We think a constitutional convention is perhaps the best way to do it. There are, for a number of reasons, and we'll get into those as the conversation progresses tonight. But so we thought a constitutional convention might be the solution to our problems. We haven't had one since 1879, so we understand and realize it's a bit of a lift. But our CEO, Jim Wunderman, wrote an op-ed for the Chronicle when we got back to San Francisco after a visit. And he writes a lot of op-eds, and his mom reads them and gives him a call, read the op-ed, Jim, I loved it. And that's about the sum total of our reaction. The reaction to this one particular op-ed was overwhelming. We received hundreds of phone calls. What do we do to help? How can we sign up? What what do we got to do to get this thing going? And we sort of realized, we've sort of unleashed this beast. How do we make this happen? We're not a government reform organization. We're a policy advocacy organization. So we've had to, over the last 18 months, build an organization to promote this idea of a constitutional convention, and we've had a lot of friends. The Courage Campaign were one of the very first people to call us. It's been an unusual coalition and collaboration, a progressive online organization and a stiff, crusty business organization, holding hands and moving this idea forward. But if we can't do this, if these disparate groups in California can't agree on a process, then I guess we would all have to agree that we're doomed. That we can't, if we can't agree on a process, then we're never going to agree on the types of reforms that we actually need. And I think we all agree that on the basis of the types of reforms that are needed, our budget system's broken. The fiscal relationship between the state and local government is completely broken, and there are a number of other things that we all are in broad agreement that are broken and need fixing. So a constitutional convention, we believe, is the way to do it. And there are a number of questions that need to be asked in relation to that, and again, I'll lay them out, but won't go into them in detail. What does a constitutional convention get to discuss? And we propose a limited constitutional convention that's limited just to issues of governance. Social issues, prayer in schools, marriage, guns, off the table, just issues of governance. Who gets to sit in a constitutional convention, who the delegates are going to be, we'll have that discussion. And what's the process to get us to a constitutional convention? And I'll give you a quick timeline on how that works. Currently, only the legislature, by a 2/3 vote, could call for a constitutional convention. We're proposing Proposition 1A that would amend the Constitution to allow the people ourselves to call for a constitutional convention, and then Proposition 1B, which would go on the same ballot in the fall of next year, which would actually call for the convention, describe the parameters and the delegate selection process. So that's our chosen method for reform. We think it's got the greatest chance of success, and it will give us perhaps a better conversation about the problems and the issues that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Blair?
Thanks. My name is Blair Beaubier. I work with the political reform program of the New America Foundation. The New America Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy institute. We have offices in California and in D.C. and work on a wide range of subject areas. We work in areas such as healthcare, fiscal policy, asset building for low-income folks, foreign policy, and the program I work with is the political reform program. Essentially, the aim of our program is to see that the government of California looks like the people of California. And if you look at the government now and the people in California, you can see that there's a disconnect. So we look at a number of different measures that would level the playing field and encourage more people to become involved in the political process from the very beginning, voter registration, all the way up to voting in elections. So let's keep in mind some things, and that is that the United States has one of the lowest voter participation rates of any civilized democracy, probably lower than the uncivilized ones as well. Not really sure what that means. So we have very few people voting. We have low registration rates. We have all sorts of problems with our elections where private money basically dominates our public elections. We have instances where a number of people are elected to office with a minority of the vote. A number of presidential elections were won by candidates who had less than a majority of the vote. 3 of the 4 last gubernatorial elections were won by candidates who had less than a majority of the vote. So we look at a number of different solutions to address these problems. Solutions such as ranked choice voting, which is used here in San Francisco to elect the city offices and the supervisors. We look at proportional representation, which is how most of the democracies in the world elect their legislatures. We look at public financing, and we look at ways of expanding voter registration. In fact, I'm happy to announce that one of our bills on voter registration was just signed into law by the governor. That's AB 30. That's going to set the voter registration age in California uniformly at 17. Under the previous law, you could register to vote only if you were going to be 18 by the next election, and that created a lot of confusion and inefficient implementation of voter registration laws. So I think we have to ask ourselves, if we give the legislature new rules and new tools, is that going to be enough? Is that really going to get us the government that we want and that we deserve? Some other things to keep in mind and to keep things in perspective. We've heard over and over about California being one of the largest economies in the world. Well, I think we have to stop thinking about California just as a state. Wyoming's a state. Montana's a state. Delaware's a state. When you have 38 million people in an incredibly diverse setting, sprawling geographically over a good chunk of the North American continent, you really have to think of this as a nation state. Our population is roughly equivalent to Canada's, to Poland, to Argentina. We're much more populous than, say, Australia or Greece or Portugal. And we have to look at ways where the governance actually matches what we have in terms of population and diversity. So I think we can go into some of these solutions and proposals a little further on in the conversation. One of our roles in this Constitutional Convention discussion has been to flesh out some of the details, in particular how the delegates will be chosen. We jumped on this bandwagon in large part because we've been pushing something called citizen assemblies. And citizen assemblies are gatherings of citizens that have convened in places like British Columbia, Ontario, in Europe, and versions of citizen assemblies have been used in the United States, and this is where we convene ordinary citizens to take charge of the future. And that's one of the proposals we'll be discussing here today as well. Thank you.
And I think there's an opportunity, if people have questions, to write your questions down, and we're just going to kind of start asking some of the questions. And, you know, Robert, you talked about the flawed initiative process. And one of the frustrating parts of my job is when the economy is good, there's plenty of money, nobody complains about the programs. When we face this fiscal crisis, everybody's fighting over the crumbs. And because of the initiatives that have passed, those are the mandates that have to get paid first. And then it leaves very little to go to the other programs that we have been traditionally funding. So what do you propose? I know we want to have citizens put initiatives on the ballot. It seems like only the wealthy ones can actually afford to do this. But what happens is it becomes a huge problem, like our jail issue, our prison population. Prop 13 passed, not Prop 13, but 3 strikes laws. And since the voters passed it, we have to abide by it, and there's a lot of people in jail that perhaps shouldn't be in prison based on the 3 strikes. So what do you propose?
There are a couple of ways I would respond to that. First, I think we need to keep in mind the larger context in which this happens. One of the main reasons why voters feel the need to do ballot box budgeting, as we call it, is because the legislature can't do it themselves. Not, again, because we have bad legislators, but because we have a bad process. Since 1978, we have had a structural revenue deficit. California, since Prop 13 passed, has simply not had the money to pay for our basic needs, for schools, for water, for roads, transportation systems, and even prisons. So when Californians decide to do something like create the 3 strikes rule, mandating a massive expansion of prisons, it comes out of the pocket of education, comes out of the pocket of health care. So to solve this problem, right, to get the public to do less ballot box budgeting, you need to solve the underlying revenue problem. You need to fix Prop 13, you need to fix the way the state raises money, you need to fix the way the state funds its core services. The second problem then is, how do you deal with the initiative process itself, right? Let's say that we have the ideal situation in which suddenly California, we're back in the 1960s and 1970s, the California dream is alive again, and we can have the best school system in the nation. What do we do then when voters get another bright idea like 3 strikes? There are reforms that I do think ought to be pursued. I think pay-as-you-go initiatives are probably a very good idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking voters to identify funding sources for new programs. I think there are also ways to explore returning the initiative process to the power of the people. 100 years ago, almost exactly 100 years ago, 1911, we created the initiative process because we had a state government controlled by corporations, primarily the railroads, and they essentially bought legislators and got the policies they wanted done, and the people of the state of California were frozen out of the process. The initiatives were designed to fix that, and they are failing to fix that. One of the main things we need to do is have some real initiative campaign finance reform. Find ways to limit the expenditures of different organizations on ballot initiative campaigns. I also think we need to explore ways to make it easier for the people of California to actually propose initiatives. I was born and raised here in California. I know that might sound weird to people, but the notion of initiatives, and the fact that I was born in California. But having lived here, people in California are wedded to the initiative process. We are never getting rid of it, even if we decide it is a good thing, and I'm not convinced it would be a good thing to get rid of it. It's going to be here. What we need to do is find ways to allow the people of California to perhaps use it more easily. Looking at online signature gathering processes would be, I think, very useful for that. Another final thing I would keep in mind, knowing the Prop 8 debacle, I think it is worth exploring making initiatives, constitutional amendments in particular, must be passed by 2/3 of the electorate. You could also do a grandfather clause so that if you wanted to, repeal Prop 8, something that the Courage Campaign is very actively supporting, the repeal of Prop 8, that you could have a grandfather clause that any initiative passed by a majority could be repealed by a majority, but all initiatives going forward that change the Constitution must be approved by a 2/3 rule. That's one way you can protect the Constitution. You look at the U.S. Constitution, you need 2/3 of the House and Senate to pass the amendment, and you need 3/4 of the states. We've had 27 amendments in the history of the United States Constitution in 222 years. We've had 500 amendments to the California Constitution in 130 years. Clearly, we need to find a way to balance giving people the power to use the initiative process as intended, while also ensuring that it is not misused.
Anyone else have any comments? Or should we just go on to the next question?